science on the toxicity of fluoridation of water is just extensive. Even the National Academy of Science has completed a huge study which confirmed everything we've been saying in the research literature about toxicity of fluoride. And I wrote a paper along with Czechoslovakian scientists, which is a comprehensive review of the toxicity of fluoride that collects all the research known on it. So, the research is so extensive, it's ridiculous that we're still adding fluoride to water, plus the fact that they admit that it has nothing to do with reducing cavities. Even the American Dental Association had to admit that drinking fluoride in water does not reduce cavities one bit. But they're still doing it. Well, you have to ask, why are you doing it then? So that leaves it open to a lot of interpretation why they're doing it. Same thing with organic food. What they did is test the protein content and a few other contents of food and comparative and said, well, there was no real difference. What they didn't test is the most important part of the plant, and that's the flavonoid. There's a significant difference in the two, and in the difference in toxins in the food.
So they didn't test the ring structures, the trace minerals, the cofactors. They didn't test the GMO alterations that are in the GMO.
All this is left out. And, of course, this is the way modern politicalized science does. If you work for government or you work for institutes that are promoting programs, they just manipulate the science, release it to the press. The press regurgitates it, and then all the true scientists out there who are saying it's a bunch of baloney, they never get interviewed. Their material will never appear in the before the public eye. That's just the way they do things. Same thing with the vaccine. What we know about vaccines is so frightening. If the public knew it, I don't think anyone would submit their child to be injected to these things. But I can't believe the number of young people that are coming into me saying they're having trouble with their memory. I said, when I was growing up, I never heard a complaint that you had trouble with your memory. It was, and when you were young, you could remember everybody's phone number, everybody's name. I could remember where every book in my library was. I could turn to any page. But more and more people are having difficulty with memory and cognitive function that are very young. And so, yes, something is going on. There's a number of environmental assaults on people, things like fluoride in water, the heavy use of pesticides and herbicides. It's all in the atmosphere. When they study people, look at their fat content of these chemicals, they find something like 80 to 110 different organic chemicals from industry, pesticides, and herbicides in their tissues. All of the vaccinations, we give 40, 50, 60 vaccines by the time a child enters college. They're just being vaccinated to death. Well, I do rather intense research in the literature, collecting all that's known from our research in the neuroscience of vaccination and what it does. Well, there's just compelling evidence that these vaccines, the way they're being given, is producing a state of chronic brain inflammation. And that when your brain is chronically inflamed, it produces depression, it produces disorientation, confusion, difficulty thinking clearly, just clouded thinking in your mind, fatigue, abnormal behavior, even violent behavior, criminal behavior, suicide, addictions. The list just goes on. And this is all well demonstrated in the scientific literature. The problem is it's never discussed because of the pressure and the power of those that are promoting these vaccines in our children. For instance, the average child's getting 36 vaccines by the time they start school. That is an enormous assault on the brain by this vaccine. And the process by which they do it, that is spacing them every 2 months and giving 5 and 6 and 7 vaccines at each office visit, produces an enormous activation of the brain's immune system in a prolonged way. And each section or segment of that vaccination process produces a real hyperintense brain inflammation that in some children produces autism, some ADHD, some have seizures, some have other neurological dysfunctions. Well, this whole flu vaccine thing, they're planning on doing 3 serial vaccines look at the neuroscience of that, that produces a rather significant prolonged brain inflammation, particularly with the adjuvant they're going to use, which is called MF59 and ASO3, which contains squalene. Squalene is associated with a very high incidence of autoimmune disorders, particularly of the brain, for instance, producing a multiple sclerosis-like syndrome. Well, it caused a 200% increase in ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a fatal disorder. So they finally admitted that. It took a long time to get them admitted. Several, I remember a lieutenant colonel testifying before Congress, and he was in the middle stages of ALS and eventually died. It took a lot of pressure before they admitted, yes, the vaccine caused these soldiers to die from this horrible disease. Well, it's not the only disease that's neurological, this Guillain-Barré ascending paralysis that you talked about. Well, in 1976, there were over 500 reported cases, but there were probably 10 or 100 times greater number of cases that were never reported because it's not a reportable disease. You don't have to report it. They had 3 elderly people died in one vaccination center in one day after receiving the vaccine. And they're doing the same thing now they did back then. It's the bait and switch. They tested one vaccine and then gave millions of people a different vaccine. That's exactly what they admit they're planning to do now. I have in Nature magazine an interview with the head of the U.S. Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Anthony Fauci, F-A-U-C-I, and they asked him a series of questions. One was, what are you going to do to test this vaccine? They said, well, we have 5 tests, and they said, well, are you going to put the adjuvant in the vaccine to test it? And he said, no. We're going to test it without the adjuvant on children and pregnant women and other people. And then he said, well, are you going to use the adjuvanted vaccine when you actually give it to people? He said, yes. So they're testing one vaccine, and it's going to give a different vaccine. It's the adjuvant, the powerful immune stimulant, that produces most of the complications that are associated with vaccination. And the next question, he said, are you going to test adjuvants in children? And he said, and I quote, I don't think anybody has really good data on adjuvants in children. And decision that we will not give the adjuvated flu vaccine to kids, we don't have time to collect substantial data. In other words, during the test, but when the vaccine comes out, the children will get vaccines with adjuvant in it.
Now, Dr. Blaylock, just to interrupt you, talking to yourself and other scientists, other medical doctors, other brain surgeons and neurologists, more and more we're realizing that, yes, mercury and aluminum are bad, do build up, do cause problems when it's directly put in the bloodstream. You know, different from eating fish and it goes through you and is bound to the other, other things in the food. So most of it leaves the body. Again, I'm not here being a doctor. I'm just going off what doctors have said. Do you agree with a lot of the literature coming out that mercury overall is somewhat of a red herring, that it's really the autoimmune inflammation, not just in the brain, but even in other organs that's being associated with burning out the pancreas, attacking the liver, attacking the stomach walls, the intestinal walls, the brain, just basically the whole body?
Well, all of this has been proven, and we know that mercury, even in infinitesimally small doses, powerfully increases brain inflammation, activates the brain's immune system, which is destructive of brain connections.
Oh, so mercury is the adjuvant. Okay, so I always thought that mercury was the preservative. Okay.
Well, it is the preservative, but it also produces a high incidence of autoimmunity. See, they never mention that mercury does this effect when they talk about it.